During the Carolingian period, so-called Panzerreiter, which means horse-mounted early medieval warriors, played an important role in the upper class. These specially trained and heavily armed warriors were obliged to perform various military services within the Franconian army. When asked about the equipment of this mounted special force, numerous written sources provide interesting information. A letter of Charlemagne addresses to Abbot Fourrat of Saint-Denis a list, for example, which includes all the individual pieces of equipment of a Panzerreiter, including a sword, better known as a Sparta, lance, shield, or even a scale armor, as well as a so-called semi-Sparta, which is most likely to be associated with a so-called Sax, a single-edged sword of the early Middle Ages. Looking at the archaeological sources, numerous burial inventories from the Merovingian period reflect exactly these listed equipment elements. However, looking at the Carolingian period itself, the situation is much more difficult, since the widespread implementation of Christianity in most regions of the Frankish Empire inserted a culture of burial without grave goods. However, exactly this sphere of the upper class, out of which the Panzerreiter in the Carolingian era was composed, is to be conveyed and researched in the open-air laboratory Lauresham. When it comes to archaeological models, you often have to rely on deposit or settlement finds, in which most finds are difficult to interpret due to a diverging context. Nevertheless, or perhaps because of this, an international team of archaeologists, craftsmen, and archaeotechnicians at the open-air laboratory has set itself the task of researching all the individual equipment items of such a Panzerreiter. In 2017 and 2018, in our initial experiment, we reconstructed a pattern-welded Sparta found in Mannheim-Neckarau, Germany, of 1932. The sword is now part of the collections of the Reichsengelhorn museums in Mannheim. A special feature of the Sparta is certainly the additional pattern-weld inlays on the blade, as well as the elaborate damascened inlay grip. Since it was not allowed to take samples of the original for conservatory reasons, the project team decided to first learn to understand the manufacturing and decoration techniques of the Sparta. Based on the macroscopic observations and X-rays, the project team first dedicated itself to reconstructing the blade with modern materials and tools, using a total of 6 rods of 7 layers each. In a further step, inlays were finally carried out. As already explained, it was also made of pattern-welded steel, and finally the blade was sharpened. A second test was devoted to the reconstruction of the elaborate damascening out of brass. One after another, the crossguard, the pommel plate and its crown form were made and finally connected to the blade. The grip wrapping and scabbard were reconstructed in an ideal type manner using iconographic sources. The result is, in our opinion, an impressive demonstration of the high level of craftsmanship not only of our blacksmiths within the project, but above all in relation to early medieval professional colleagues and the status of the Panzerreiter. In 2018 and 19, the reconstruction of another equipment item took place. A so-called Flügelkopflanze, a winged spear, which according to written and iconographic sources was one of the main equipment items of the Panzerreiter. The spear has the same fine context as the Sparta, and again the manufacturing technique was more in the foreground as the authentic design. The silver wire inlays posed a particular challenge in this reconstruction. We were able to start a new phase of the Panzerreiter project in 2019, when material analysis, in this case of a Carolingian long sax, were possible for the first time. It was now possible to determine the carbon level of the individual iron rods used. This led to the decision to use exclusively refined and, if possible, self-smelted iron for the reconstruction. In addition to material that had been smelted in Lauresham, also a piece of refined iron was used that had been produced in a test series by blacksmith and archaeotechnician Frank Trommer. A short clip, kindly provided by Rüdiger Krause and the University of Frankfurt, gives us a vivid impression of the individual steps of the smelting process and the first elements of the refining process. After this clip, it is worth taking a look at the further processing of the individual rods. After additional refining and forging to remove flaws, the individual rods were finally assembled according to the analysis results of the original. After forged welding, it could finally be forged out and the finished Zach's blade could be made out of it. Also in case of the scabbard, it was possible to fall back on a well-preserved and analyzed original find. The Zach's scabbard of Barkhausen was much slimmer than the one we reconstructed, but the dimension could be adjusted without much problems. This equipment item, which just recently has been completed, is to be presented to the general public soon and adds up quite well to the other important equipment items of Panzerreiter on display at the open-air laboratory. As a conclusion, we would like to mention that we will continue this project in future and that we are currently working on the production of a shield and a helmet. It is therefore worthwhile to continue to follow this project.